So hello everyone, welcome to this webinar that has been organized by the MOOC project, so ForestMoocForChange. We're delighted to welcome you all. We're happy to see there are at least 200 participants. So welcome, welcome. So this webinar is organized as a part of, well, in the context of the online course that is called ForestMoocForChange. So MOOC is a massive open online course for forest resilience. And this MOOC, so this online course was created by a European project called ForestMoocForChange with 4 partners. So we have been Forêt.Nature Association has been coordinating this project. And we also have a partner from Ireland, which is Chigask. We also have a partner from Germany, ANW, so the equivalent of ProSilva Germany, and also from France, ProSilva France. So these 4 partners have created this MOOC. So for your information, this online course concerns continuous cover forestry and its implementation in several countries here in Europe. The course is open to everyone. The course is available in 3 languages, so in French, in English, and in German. So a first session took place at the end of 2023 with more than 9,000 participants, and which was a really good success for us. And the new session is actually currently underway, and we have more than 3,000 participants in the second session. And actually, for the moment, the 4th chapter has been just put online this week. So the principle of this MOOC is quite simple. A chapter is put online each week. And so you can watch the videos and do some field exercises. And at the end of each chapter, there is a quiz. And if you reply correctly to this quiz, at the end of the MOOC, you can get a present certification. Okay, I will start this webinar by presenting the different speakers that we will be talking today, and each of them will say a few words to present themselves and their link with CCF. And after that, Stefanie Schmidt from the European Commission will present the closer to nature guidelines. And after that, I'll ask a few questions to the different speakers. Okay, so first of all, we have Stefanie Schmidt who is a policy officer actually from the DG Environment of the European Commission. So maybe Stefanie, could you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. Yes, you already said I'm working in DG Environment for the European Commission as a policy officer, following up the EU forest strategy that the Commission launched, I think roughly 1.5 years ago, and here with a particular focus on, for example, closer to nature forestry management, but also, for example, the proposal for the forest monitoring law and payment for ecosystem services, to give you a bit of an idea. And I have a background in natural resource management. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stefanie. I forgot to say 2 practical things. You can ask questions in the chat. I can't promise that we will answer all of these questions, but we will try. And also an information that you have probably seen, this webinar is being recorded. So okay, so the second speaker, we want to present Eckart Senitza, who is the president of ProSilva Europe. Eckart, could you say something about yourself? Eckart, you have to enable your microphone.
Sorry for that. I come from the south of Austria. I'm quite near to Italy and Slovenia, and I'm a private forest owner, and I'm running my own forest enterprise since more than 30 years. And in parallel, I run a consulting bureau for forestry. So we have to deal with different customers, making forest roads, management plans, and also concern project together with biodiversity, etc. These issues. Yeah, and since now almost 7 years, I'm head of ProSilva to try to hold this together, to develop it further. And now we are in a very interesting phase because the demand for teaching, for learning is so big, and this is not fulfilled by university and regular schools. So this online course that Christine mentioned is one of these examples that pushes the whole thematic forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Eckart. The next speaker I want to present is who comes from Slovenia and who is a scientist and teacher at the University of Ljubljana and also vice president of ProSilva Europe. Dusan, can you say something about yourself and maybe your link to CCF?
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Just a few words about my background. I started working actually as a forester in a forestry service in Slovenia, but after that I was invited to do some research on the faculty where I continued this research and also did my PhD, and now I'm also teaching silviculture in addition to some research that I also do. Maybe just to give a more practical perspective, I do have a small property which I manage, so I have these problems. I mean, I can see the problems from a forest owner point of view, at least a little bit with what I do. So, I guess. Thank you. That's it.
That's very useful. Okay, so thank you, Dusan. And the last speaker I want to present is Margot Gessen from France, and who is a forest manager specialized in Mediterranean forests and who works for AviSilva. Margot, could you give us a bit of information on you and your link as well to CCF?
Yeah, thank you, Christine, and thank you for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. So briefly, my name is Margot Gessen, and I've studied forestry and graduated my engineer degree 3 years ago. I've since been working as a forest manager by joining the AviSilva office in France, in Manosque. And my job at AviSilva consists to offer forest management services for private owners of forest in southeastern France, according to CCF principles. So the activity have been created by my colleague Nicola Luigi, and now there's 5 of us working as a team across the region and providing multiple services. And although working part-time at ProSilva France, this association aims to promote and develop CCF in France. And as Christine said, we were part of the MOOC project.
Okay, thank you, Margot. Okay, well, we can start. Stefanie, could I ask you to share your screen? And so Stefanie is going to talk to us about the guidelines to closer to nature forestry.
Yes, thank you, Christine. Happy to do so. But before I do so, let me take the opportunity also to congratulate you and partners for organizing this course. I think it speaks a lot also echoing Eckart a bit to what we also hear in our discussions that we have here in Brussels with forest owners and other stakeholders in terms of the need for capacity building in this direction and the limited availability and of respective courses. And just before I came here talking to some representatives of the forest owners here in Brussels, they mentioned that they also had followed the first edition of the course and thought that it was very useful. So again, congratulations and very happy to be here. Okay, then I will start sharing my screen, and I hope it will be the right one this time. Okay, can you see? Yes, very good. Okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Very good. Okay, let me start with giving you a brief overview on why the Commission has developed and published these guidelines. They were foreseen in two policy documents that the Commission has published in the last couple of years. One is the biodiversity strategy for 2030, and then also later on in the new EU forest strategy for 2030, which basically echoed the wording that you see here for the biodiversity strategy, first of saying that the Commission will develop these kind of guidelines, but also will develop a definition on what we actually talk about when we talk about closer to nature forestry practices. And that building on these guidelines, there will also be a development of a voluntary closer to nature certification scheme later on. And the forest strategy also gives the first broad framing, you can say, for closer to nature, which is here, as you can see, a set of multiple practices to ensure multifunctional forests by combining biodiversity and increased carbon absorption with timber-related revenues. So that was basically our starting point that we had been given by the policy strategy papers that the Commission had adopted following the Green Deal. We then engaged in a quite intensive and very collaborative and evidence-based approach with different actors from the member states and experts and stakeholders to, first of all, to refine this definition in terms of what are we talking about when we talk about closer to nature as it is provided in the forest strategy. And also how can this actually be developed in terms of objectives and principles and measures and so on. And as you can see here, this has been we really took quite a bit of time for this. So this was a process over 3 years with a lot of partly, I would say, very complex discussions, because there is a very, very broad different perspectives across Europe, what this could mean and what it could entail. And I think at the end of the day, what we've been putting forward is a quite neat compromise, really trying to bring together all these different perspectives and expectations. So just to present a bit the outline, what do you find in these guidelines? Well, first of all, a rationale why we've been doing these guidelines, then what's the target audience of the guidelines and what are they actually about, what's their purpose, and then a set of measures, what we call a toolbox on how you actually translate closer to nature into forest management, or how you could do it, as well as then also putting forward a couple of critical enablers to really support and facilitate taking up these different measures that are set out in the guidelines. And then following the discussions that we had during these 3 years, there was quite often the call for, or underlining that there are so big differences across Europe when you look at forest management and the forestry context, that we also decided to include a regional chapter where you find different examples from different eco-regions in Europe, which has been developed with actors from those regions, including NGOs, as well as forest agencies, public authorities, depending who volunteered or could be volunteered to then actually engage in drafting these chapters. And then at the end, there's also a couple of good practice examples to showcase how this can actually work in practice. Then just briefly on the rationale, what was the starting point? The starting point was really the state of forests in Europe today, where based on the information that we have, we can see that there is a mixed picture in terms of some improvement, but also deterioration in terms of, for example, biodiversity and the different aspects that are relevant for biodiversity, like, for example, deadwood volume, but also vis-a-vis, for example, biomass volume and productivity. And also that there is an increasing toll taken also by climate change vis-a-vis, as expressed, for example, that on average 1 out of 4 trees is showing severely or moderate damages in terms of defoliation, and that this is actually an increasing trend. And that, biodiversity on average is not improving, but rather showing a decline based on the information that the EU has from the monitoring that is happening in the Natura 2000 sites. And then also seeing that when it comes to biodiversity, different types of forestry practices have a different relevance in terms of biodiversity development, and in particular, for example, practices like clear cutting or the removal of all trees, or also removal of all deadwood and dying trees has a negative impact for the biodiversity development in the forests in Europe. Then, as I said already, climate change is coming on top of that, aggravating a lot of the impacts that we see on biodiversity and forest resilience overall, and of course also forecasted, and I think as many of you probably know from the practice already happening, also changing how the forest looks in the different regions and also the dynamics in the different regions. And here you can see one of the forecasts that exist, modelings in terms of how the distribution of the different forest types will change in the next 40 to 50 years, for example. At the same time, there is an increase in interest in forest products, wood and non-wood, as well as other ecosystem services, which again then makes the need to find ways to reconcile this increasing need, as well as the increasing impacts, for example, by climate change, somehow together through also the practices that are then applied in forest management. And that basically is the rationale in a nutshell why we thought that it's important to put forward these guidelines for closer to nature forestry practices, which aim to promote biodiversity-friendly and adaptive forest management in order to promote multifunctionality in forests as well as their resilience, while at the same time also making sure that forests also can continue to provide the benefits for society and economy that they are also expected to do. And here the focus is really to assist the competent authorities and key stakeholders at the different scales in taking up these kind of practices and measures that they are outlined in the guidelines. What was important in the discussion, or coming from the discussions that we had, was that these guidelines should be dedicated mainly for commercially used forests, while at the same time, of course, there's also some measures which might also be interesting or useful for more protected forests. Then, based on the discussions, we came to the agreement that it's not useful to frame closer to nature within one or two sentences and to say closer to nature is this and that, but rather try to approach it as a concept by providing some basic considerations and principles to the concept. And here you can see an overview of the basic considerations that have been put together in the guidelines, like that it's based on ecosystem dynamics, that it's about safeguarding and maintaining forests and strengthening them as multifunctional, resilient ecosystems, while bringing together different aspects also in their daily management, and really to perceive them as the complex ecosystems that they are. Then, building on these considerations, the guidelines set out a couple of general principles which build to a large extent on the work that was led or done by Bo Larsen together with a whole set of other forest experts and scientists, and published by the European Forest Institute in 2022. And here you can see the ones that building on this document, as well as also other literature and the discussions, the general principles that we then put together in the guidelines. Then building on this, again, there's two main objectives that we've set out for Closer to Nature. One is really to enhance the structural complexity in all its different dimensions, as well as to promote natural and rely as much as possible on natural forest dynamics. Then there was also a big discussion, or long discussion, I should say, in terms of your starting points that you have in different forests, as well as the level of ambition. And there was an agreement that the guidelines will not prescribe that you have to reach a certain level of ambition, or that you only can do it when you come from this and that starting point, basically. But rather what we try to do is really to provide also a kind of process that you can start from different forestry practices that you have, and then decide on how much you want to then, building on those, apply those measures that are also included in these guidelines. And to facilitate this, we put together a kind of overview of some of the most common approaches that were identified in the discussion, as well as then discussing them in terms of their benefits and limitations for biodiversity, so that people also have a bit an idea of where they actually stand and where they're starting off. Then I've come to the toolbox. As I said, that's a set of measures that can be taken through the different phases of a forest management cycle. And here you can see the basic overview. There's also some measures included which are not, strictly speaking, forest management. That's notably the setting areas aside, as well as the managing ungulate species. However, they were taken up here in terms of being very relevant in terms of your forest management, or bringing, for example, in terms of setting areas aside, additional benefits possibly to a closer to nature management approach. And then just to give you a couple of examples on what is then entailed in these measures is here, for example, the promoting natural tree regeneration. The guidelines set out that this should really be your first choice in terms of regeneration for the different reasons that are then discussed in the guidelines. And here's just a couple of key points, the reasons why you should opt for natural tree regeneration if you do closer to nature, but also then discussing artificial regeneration and certain conditions under which this might be needed, as well as also then highlighting how you then over time can move from artificial regeneration towards natural regeneration, which should again be the first choice according to the guidelines as we've set them out. And then they also make a reference, for example, to another set of guidelines that we've put out a couple of months before, which is on biodiversity-friendly afforestation, reforestation, and tree planting, which again discusses regeneration in more detail, and also has relevant information that feeds into the closer to nature conceptual approach. Same for ensuring respectful harvest conditions. Again, there's a couple of conditions and framing what would be considered harvesting according to the closer to nature concept as it's in the guidelines. The first one is that intensive practices should be avoided. There's also quite a dedicated section on clear cutting, for example, and how clear cutting is not as such considered closer to nature, but for example that, or in terms of its negative impacts on biodiversity overall, but for example that you might have situations in terms of where you do certain small gap cuts and so on, which then again under certain conditions can be considered also in line with moving closer to nature in practices. And then also here it makes a link to the third set of guidelines, which is the one on defining, mapping, monitoring, and strictly protecting EU primary and old growth forests, which is the third set of guidelines that we've put out last year. Then another one is optimizing deadwood retention. Deadwood is very important for biodiversity in its different phases and shapes and so on. And therefore, it's important to see how to ensure that you have a optimized availability of different types of deadwood, while of course, this has also to consider other aspects, like, for example, today very important in the Mediterranean, which is the fire management, for example, where certain types of deadwood might pose a bigger fire risk, while other types of deadwood, for example, might also actually contribute to fire prevention. So that, of course, also has to be seen in a balance. And then, for example, here on this graph, you can see, just to give people a bit of reference on what kind of deadwood volumes bring which kind of benefits is here. It's a couple of years ago, but on the left part, you can see the current, or like I said, some years ago, the deadwood volumes that could be found in some protected areas in different parts of Europe, while next to it then the actual deadwood needs of certain types of species. Then enabling the transition, I said before, there is also then next to it some chapters to discuss a bit, okay, on what kind of support, what kind of facilitators you can have to make this happen in practice. And here you can see a general overview. And also here, based on the discussions that we have, it's not only, you can say, strictly limited to critical enablers, but also it also takes up a discussion, for example, on climate change adaptation and resilience, as well as also a dedicated discussion on wildfires, considering that this often is also an important factor in terms of what kind of, in terms facilitating a transition into closer to nature forest management practices. And just again, to give an example, what can be found there? For example, here, training and skills. As I said before, from the discussions, we saw that some countries have a lot of expertise in practices that can be considered or would speak to what we've put out together here in the guidelines, while in some other countries, people really came and said, this is very interesting, but we actually wouldn't know how to do this. So that's why we said, okay, training and skills, that's a very important element of making this happen in practice. And there it then makes links and lists a bit on what support and possibilities exist on an EU level, as well as also making a link to some important networks and initiatives that we are aware of, notably the Integrate or also the Silva, of course. And the same economic viability. I mean, since this is for forests that are used also for wood production or for timber, of course, often people are concerned that if they go from intensive management practices to closer to nature, that there will be a loss of income. And there we are also trying to discuss a bit, first of all, how to look at profitability and also then to highlight the benefits that closer to nature can have, as well as also highlighting some support possibilities that exist on the EU level, as well as also how to, for example, diversify income sources from forests beyond the timber production. And that's where it makes a link to another guidance document that was also published not too long ago on payment for ecosystem services. Then briefly on, as I said before, there's a set of regional chapters as well, which were developed by different actors or together with different actors from the respective regions. It does not cover all regions in Europe, unfortunately, but I think a fair number of them. And since we left a lot of freedom to the respective co-authors, they differ in their approach. Some are very looking at the regions overall, and some of them present rather specific examples or certain parts or discuss certain parts of a given region, while at the same time following a similar logic in terms of really showcasing what's already happening, what are specific challenges, as well as opportunities for closer to nature management in the respective contexts. Yeah, and then just to come to finish, the guidelines also should be seen as part of a package. As I said, there's a whole set of 3 guidelines which we put together to enhance or to promote or support sustainable forest management. Then there's a direct link to the guidance on payment for ecosystem schemes, as well as then getting a bit more concrete in terms of benefiting from promoting multifunctionality and ecosystem services in forests, the legal proposal for the EU framework for carbon removal certification, very important here, as well as the legal proposal on forest monitoring, which then is also supposed to support actors with the respective knowledge. And as I said, a further incentive which we will start working on under the next commission. The commission is going to change towards the end of the year, which is the voluntary certification for closer to nature forest management, which is the second deliverable provided for in the forest strategy. And I think with that, I'm coming to an end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefanie. That was very interesting. We can see that it has been a long-term project, and we hope it will inspire a lot of national and regional strategies in forestry. So thank you for this long-term work. I'll let you catch your breath, so I'll ask a question to someone else. Eckart, Senitza, can I ask you a question now?
Yeah,
so Eckart is president of ProSilva Europe, and I want to ask you, now that we've seen what the guidelines are and that they are called closer to nature forestry, could you maybe tell us the difference between closer to nature forestry and continuous cover forestry that is recommended by ProSilva?
I think you mixed up. You wanted to ask the difference between close to nature forestry and closer to nature forestry, which the R is a kind of public relation element, because it should symbolize a direction and not a status. And of course, close to nature forestry is always never a status. It's just a bundle of principles that are similar to those that Stefanie presented. The continuous cover forestry is a term that in the English expression, of course, it comes from Britain, because they have a lack of native tree species. So they have introduced tree species and they want to do continuous cover forestry with that. If you take it to the German expression, Dauerwald, it's the same. It's very important. I think close to nature forestry is sometimes seen a bit narrower than it is, in fact. Some people think it's just like Planterwald in Switzerland, and that's it, and therefore they don't like the system because it will not work in another place. So from the beginning, close to nature forestry is an open system which should adapt to Mediterranean and boreal and alpine regions, as well as now these new published guidelines should be. So I don't think there's such a big difference. It's more some prefer the one term and others prefer the other. And if you go to the table that Stefanie showed us, this table shows that the Commission in their paper want to include every system that is a little bit in the direction. So triad or this other retention forestry, which is favored by some of the northern countries, which is in my experience is not really close to nature. It's just let some elements leave for nature and the rest is done like before. So we can have a long discussion about that. The main things, the main points were pointed out by Stefanie already, and I think the soil protection, the water protection, and also then timber harvest that doesn't do any damage. So in the ProSilva principles, the ecosystem function is number one. And so I think ecosystem is not a product. It's a system that works within natural processes. And sometimes we focus our eyes more on the phenomena that are above the ground, and we don't focus what's under the ground. And that's very important because we discuss about dead wood amount for some special birds that need very special conditions. But we sometimes we forget about conditions underground. So I mean, mycorrhiza, all that organisms that are not seen, but they work together, and that's the most important thing for me is underground, and then of course the rest is growing on that basic. So therefore also these mixed light regimes helps to have different ground conditions and not clear with sunlight that leads to loss of carbon storage and that goes to the air. And if you have large clear cuts, you lose the mycorrhiza that has to grow in again slowly, and this takes years or decades. But that's the reason that we need a healthy basic for the forest that grows to the heaven.
Okay, thank you, Eckart. Maybe I could ask a question to Dusan from Slovenia. So you are a forestry scientist in Slovenia, and we often consider Slovenia as being, the cradle and the origin of ProSilva principles, and as ProSilva Europe was created in Slovenia. So can you tell us if continuous cover forestry is applied everywhere in Slovenia, and are there barriers that exist for the implementation?
Yes, thank you for the question. I mean, the whole area of Slovenia is managed in this way. This was actually officially or legally started. This implementation of this kind of management started after the Second World War. In 1947, the clear cut was prohibited in Slovenia. So from that time on, and there was a lot of the important principles that were at that time also put in the forest law were like the principles of sustainability, close to nature approach, and multifunctionality. But of course, this was only a result of some historical developments in our country, which made foresters see how dangerous it is to use intensive clear cutting systems, especially in the karst area, which was, I guess, the basics for this development. Today, these principles and management is actually implemented with the help of Slovenia Forest Service, which is an organization covering forests in the whole area of Slovenia with no regard to the ownership, which means that these principles are every forest in Slovenia is all the planning and all the tree marking are done by this forest service, which means that it's a direct impact on the management of this forest. This is one system that can help in promoting these ideas. Of course, there are many challenges, but I guess we can discuss this maybe later on, because otherwise it's going to be too long.
So Dusan, according to you, is it possible to implement ProSilva principles everywhere in Europe?
I'm sure, because these are principles, so they can be adapted to any condition. I'm absolutely sure of that, because Slovenia is a very diverse country in terms of climate and also in terms of soil conditions, and you can do it. So, but you need to adapt to it and make it make the change slowly and with a lot of all the time. You need to check if what you did is really giving a good result.
Yes, and for those who have seen the MOOC, the course, you can see that all these principles are adapted to different contexts in Europe, and we see it with 4 different countries in the Forest MOOC. So I want to ask Margot Gessen a question. She is in the Mediterranean forests in France. Margot, could you maybe tell us about the specificities of Mediterranean forests, and how is it possible to apply continuous cover forestry principles to these types of forests?
Yeah, of course. Maybe first of all, I would like to talk about the climate because it has to be taken into account. It is very characteristic and influences a lot the forest in the region. You might know that the Mediterranean climate is even named after the region, so maybe it's for a reason. And for those who don't know, in Mediterranean, the winter are mild, the summers are hot, and there's plenty of sunshine and frequent strong winds. But mainly, there are a few rainy days, and they are irregularly distributed over the year, which leads mainly to summer drought and all these complex conditions. Make the growing condition really complicated for the trees, and it results in below average productivity of the forest in the Mediterranean region. And there's another factor maybe I would mention that has shaped the Mediterranean forest over time, and it is human activities. In fact, the region have been a long-standing human occupation, and it is now highly anthropized with high population density. Their fires are part of it. I would just mention that, for instance, because fire is a natural occurrence in forests, particularly in the Mediterranean region. However, humans have changed the nature, the seasonality, the frequency, and the intensity of this natural disturbance. And there's also something else I would mention. It's the very long past history of silvopastoralism in the Mediterranean region. Well, all these activities resulted in young forests. The main part of the stands you can see today are less than 100 years old. So it's mainly the first generation of trees you can see. And although they're growing on difficult soils. So that's why you'll see lots of pine. Some might have been planted during the last century. And you will see also a lot of coppice stands because it has been and it still is a very common way to manage broadleaf forest in the region. So all that build our Mediterranean forests with their own specificities. And I would say it has three main characteristics: a low standing volume, limited growth, and a poor timber quality. But however, there are still some advantages, I would say, about this forest if we want to stay positive. And there is often a high diversity of tree species. And on the more social part, the owner's lack of forestry tradition can play in the CCF favors. I mean, they place little importance on the production of their forest. So this makes it easier sometimes to develop the forest other function. Like the owners have already accepted the fact that they are not going to earn a lot from the wood, and the continuous cover is then more important than money for them. And so considering these specificities, I would say, yes, it is possible to apply continuous cover forestry because some of us are already doing it in the region. And so we obviously had to find solution to the lack of productivity in the region's forests. I'm just gonna expose some of them here, not just to be short. For example, we had to compensate for lower harvesting levels we have in CCF. And so we have to increase the surfaces to compensate this lower harvesting levels. And also we gradually adapt the operators' practices because we are in a region where CCF is kind of new. So you want to make sure first that the operators know and understand what you want to do and how you want to do it. So the results are much better then. And you want also to make sure that the thinnings are well prepared. So it's all the work we are doing like every day in AviSilva. Yeah, and there's one other thing I would like to mention is to make sure that the owners are in line with the medium and the long-term objectives of the management. I mean, quality improvement is not so much of an argument here in Mediterranean. The real and way stronger argument we are using with the owners is the continuous cover. CCF appear continuous cover forestry, I mean, appears to be a real solution for some owners who doesn't want to clear cut their forests. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't have done anything. So continuous cover forestry appears to be a real alternative in the region. We mainly work with people who want to work with us, who understand what we want to do and how we want to do it. And maybe just a final thing, another solution we've come up with to enable CCF in forests that are unprofitable on timber alone is to mobilize funds to finance the different function of the forest. So for instance, non-wood products. So yeah, that's something we are working on actually. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Margot, for your reply. And just maybe a comment on the increasing quality argument. I think it doesn't work either in boreal regions. So I think there are similarities in these more extreme regions, whereas in Central Europe it is more of an argument. So yeah, it's interesting to see the similarities. And this makes me want to ask Stefanie a question about the boreal regions. I heard that in Scandinavian countries, some NGOs and other associations are a bit worried or not satisfied by the guidelines concerning the boreal region. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about this?
Sure, as far as we are aware of, so I can speak from my perspective, and then I don't know if who is here in the audience who might also be able to complement. But basically, as it's been voiced towards us, it's really the fact that we're not making a clear cut in terms of this is closer to nature and this is not closer to nature, but that we rather present it as a process where you can have different starting points and you can have different level of ambitions in terms of how far you want to go to being closer to close to nature at the end of the day in a certain way. Having said that, it's also a bit what Eckart also mentioned earlier in terms of, I think the criticism is particular in terms of having picked up also on the retention forestry, which is challenged in terms of its benefits for biodiversity or its benefits for also what also increasingly in the boreal becomes an issue in terms of climate change adaptation. However, I think what's important here to see is that, of course, the regional chapters cannot be seen separately from the main part of the guidelines. And there we are also quite clear in terms of that that retention forestry will. The benefits will depend a lot on how you actually do it. So there is a difference if you leave 5% per hectare or if you leave 60% of hectare, and that the evidence that we see hints towards that you will probably need to leave much more in the forest also on a permanent basis or longer term basis in terms of having a net biodiversity benefit. And then, of course, you at one point you will probably end up in having a discussion on where's the difference between biodiversity positive retention forestry and continuous cover, for example. But that's something that that also then needs to be seen in practice more. But I mean, the guidelines are clear in terms that for example, beyond gap cutting, so larger scale clear cutting is not from the scientific evidence that we looked at as something that has a overall benefit for biodiversity. Also picking up on something that I saw in the chat, because I also took the time to look at the chat and would also, if I may, react maybe on some of the comments and observations there. Is that, of course, some parts of biodiversity will benefit from an open area, in a larger open area in the forest, like light-loving butterflies and whatever. But overall biodiversity, what we see from the literature, it's not having an overall positive effect, and also in terms of the whole system it usually sits in, which is like in the intensive management as such. So also monoculture, artificial regeneration, and so on. The evidence that we saw shows that this is neither biodiversity friendly nor helping climate adaptation or building resilient forests for climate adaptation. So, but again, I mean, of course, that's based on the evidence that we looked at, based on the discussions that we had, based on the expertise that we were able to take into account, and that's what the guidelines are based on. Having said that, maybe because there was a question, for example, on the barriers and challenges for closer to nature, or why is not everyone doing this? Well, I'm sure colleagues want to come in there as well. Some already touched on it, but just from our perspective, what we hear often is, first of all, again, is the capacity. And then, of course, there's the history, the tradition in forest management practices, as well as also, of course, market links. So there's also the whole notion of profitability, and depending on which kind of market you are linking in, and there again is a big difference from what we see between the timber production in the boreal region or the timber production and the markets that you find in continental Europe or Central Europe parts. So that's something, of course, that then also is a factor that people take into account in terms of choosing this. But again, we are trying to promote, and something that I didn't say earlier, which I would like to say as well, is that at the moment the guidelines only exist in English, but they will come out in all European languages still this month. I was hoping I can announce them already today, but unfortunately they're not there yet, but they should come and become available through our website in the next couple of days or weeks, which again is also reflecting our intent to really reach a broad audience in the EU. And then also maybe linked to that, there was a question if we are planning an initiative for pupils on closer to nature. Not at this stage. There's in the forest strategies, there's a whole chapter on promoting capacity building and training and education. So something like that could be perceived under that work strand. So that's something, food for thought also for the future, pending interests on this as well, as we know about them. And meanwhile, we happily piggyback on events like today, for example, to be able to promote the guidelines as well as also discuss them and exchange on them. Thank you. I'll leave it for you now. Okay, thank you. Eckart, I think you wanted to react.
Yeah, just a comment on the Scandinavia discussion. If you remember that in Finland, continuous cover forestry was forbidden by law, was forbidden. And now I haven't been there, but I saw a lot of photos, and they showed us that it's possible, that it works. and that even private owners want to favor this system, even with big machinery, which has to be used in the right proper way. And I think there's so many other influences on these discussions that have nothing to do with forestry and nothing to do with silviculture. We have so many business interests of the big machine companies. They want to sell the biggest machines as they could. We have the interest of the nurseries. They want to sell trees, which we have not enough in Europe that we need. But this is a business, and the business is interested in also maybe selling planting machines or things like this. So the different other business interests mix into this forest-related discussion, and sometimes we oversee where is the border between forest discussion and external inputs. So, of course, this also influences the political discussion, even in European level. And we have the focus on spruce timber. That's the main raw material for this big sawmill industry. And this is the main focus of also Austrian sawmill industry, and Austrian sawmill industry was even spreading to Scandinavia, and they follow where they can get the spruce. This is also one factor that is always behind those discussions. So the market factor. The question, the last comment in the chat was really nice. But I don't think it will work. Why could the wood harvested from CCF can be cheaper? Then there would be more demand for that. If we have an extra certification scheme, it will be more expensive, but people must still want it. And the colleagues from Scandinavia also told us that there is an extra market for continuous cover forestry timber in Scandinavian regions, because people are aware what they want to decide to have it harvested in a better way than the others. So, but this leads too much in these marketing discussions, maybe.
Okay, thank you, Eckart. I think, Stefanie, you wanted to react, but I just wanted to ask you a question, Stefanie, that's in the chat from Georg Willem, who's asking, is there a point in the guideline on the conservation of ancient woodland in order to protect soil? And maybe you can also react to what Eckart was saying.
Yes, maybe I don't know if that's really linked, because I have to admit I'm not fully sure what ancient forest means, but there is a link to the guidelines on the mapping and monitoring and protecting of old growth and primary forest. So there is a dedicated guidelines just on that topic, which links to the commitment in the forest strategy to strictly protect these kind of forests, which is now also echoed, for example, in the latest renewable energy directive at EU level, which basically prohibits the sourcing of these kind of forests for biomass for energy. So there's a link in the Closer to Nature guidelines, but then again there's a dedicated guidelines who takes up on hopefully what also is equivalent to ancient forest. And then taking the opportunity just to come in again on this market and profitability dimension is again that what we're also trying to promote is really, as you manage forests towards multifunctional ecosystems, is really to see how forest owners and managers can benefit from this beyond the timber revenues in terms of, I highlight again the guidance on payment for ecosystem services. Then there is the carbon removal certification framework, and we are also starting a discussion on biodiversity credits, for example, although that at the moment is still a very vague concept, and we have to see how this can really frame into something that is that you can lead to an attractive source of income for forest owners and managers by bringing in different types of investors, because there's also an issue with small-scale owners, large-scale investments. But that's another avenue. And then there's good examples for that as well, as also in this guidance and on payment for ecosystem services, in terms of private and public schemes where forest owners can benefit of providing different ecosystem services as they're more prominent also in a multifunctional forest ecosystem. Yeah.
Okay, and here I see a question also in the chat, and that maybe could be directed to Dusan and also to Stefanie. But Stefanie was talking about the voluntary Closer to Nature forestry certification scheme. So my question is, Dusan, with your experience in Slovenia, where it's been where CCF is implemented for quite a while, do you think certification in CCF could be useful? And Stefanie as well, what do you think this strategy of certification in Closer to Nature forestry could bring, and could it be positive on the application on the field?
Maybe just one comment. Yeah, I mean, I wonder how efficient it would be in Slovenia, because the system is already here. But generally speaking, I think it could be connected to what Eckart was talking before. About the market, and if the certifications would be available, then also people taking the wood products or the products from the forests would have some proof about the source and about the way that this, let's say, wood was produced, and this could help, like, let's say, in the market to promote this kind of management, because it would be an advantage, let's say.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, and Stefanie, do you think this idea of this, because you were talking about voluntary certification scheme, but do you think it could be interesting that it would become, obligatory in certain countries? And would this be useful for it to come, or would it be more negative?
Well, first of all, I think we need to maybe distinguish a bit between certification and product labels, because certification does not automatically speak to a product label. Like you have them, for example, you have the SFC or the PAFC, for example, which are product labels at the end of the day. But as I said before, you have there's this discussion starting on biodiversity credits, which is a totally different type of market. Or also the carbon removal certification framework, which indeed, picking up on the chat, will still take a bit of time until it will be operational, but which will most likely also require a biodiversity benefit. So there again, there's a link, and once it's finally formally adopted, yes, there will also then it will be basically turned into practice. So that's, yeah, it takes still a bit of time, but this is going to come. Having said that, like a mandatory system, I mean, honestly, I don't know. I have not thought about this, and I think it would need to be analyzed a bit better in terms of pros and cons. But at the moment, what we have foreseen is a voluntary certification scheme, as it's provided for in the forest strategy. So it's not something that on the Commission level that we are thinking about at this stage. Thank you.
Yes, Dusan, you wanted to react?
Just a small comment on that. So I would say that it is important in all these processes to have forest owner as your ally. Mm-hmm. So you need to approach them like in a softer way, and try to give information to them as much as possible, so they understand what is going on and how this will benefit not just forest owners, but also the society. And if they do understand this, they will be cooperating much, much more than if you do something like pushing them too much. Just a small comment.
Okay, thank you, Dusan. I wanted to ask maybe a last question or a second last question before we stop. That comes from the chat as well. Somebody is asking about examples of application of CCF in the region of Southeast Europe, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, Bosnia. I don't know if one of the speakers here could actually maybe think of ideas, and maybe Margot, do you have any examples where it's a bit closer, not really closer to Mediterranean context, but do you know of any examples and implementation in this area?
Not for my part. I don't have any example. I'm just new. I don't know. I'm just working in the southwest in France, and I don't know.
You don't have examples from Greece, for example, who inspired the south of France?
Maybe more from Italy, maybe,
yes.
But it's maybe more because we also have this part of the Alps we share with Italy, and so it's maybe more in this part. So it's not so much Mediterranean forest, but more alpine. Forest.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Margot. Yes, Dusan, would you like to react?
Yes, just a short information. I cannot speak for other countries, but some of the countries you mentioned were a part of ex-Yugoslavia country, which also Slovenia was a part of. So whatever happened after Second World War with the prohibition of clear cuts was actually valid for the whole country. And there are very nice continuous cover management examples in different of these ex-Yugoslavia countries, especially in Croatia, which is probably managed, the whole country is managed in very, very similar way, except for some special management units. So there's been like this idea was there for 50 years or more, but I don't know exactly what is the situation right now. So I know some examples of really good continuous cover management, but I'm sure the information that was there before is not that, and there's a lot of people who want to do it this way there also. Thank you.
Yes, I think the best way to advance in that way would be to join the ProSilva Europe network, isn't it, Eckart? I think we should have new members from those areas.
Yeah, we have some contacts which we should intensify. They always get the information and also invitation to our meetings. And I have also one Slovenian guy, Franz Ferlin, who works in Northern Macedonia, and he has sent me also independent contacts from him, and we have communication about those. But yeah, it takes time for those people to motivate and to organize, because yeah, that's a special thing about ForSilva. It's not the authority that is a top-down thing. So we are a network which grew together and grows together, and we are a mixture of forest owners, scientists, administrative people, and lovers of the forest. And so that's the special thing, and this is our unique selling point, if you want to say it in that way. And maybe in different structures of the administration, it's not so easy to establish a kind of network like we are.
Okay, I think we will quite quickly come to an end. I just wanted to say that if Stefanie is okay, we could eventually put your PowerPoint on our website, on the Forêt.Nature website, if this is okay for you, of course. And the recording of the meeting should also be available on the website of Forêt.Nature. So it's forêtnature.be. In one word, maybe we could put it in the message, link to our website, so that people who want to share this information could do so. And so I want to thank all of our speakers. Thank you very much for your time and your knowledge. Stefanie, thanks so much for this big work you have coordinated. I see it was a long-term work and a lot of negotiations. And thank you, Dusan. Thank you, Eckart. Thank you, Margot, for your participation. I hope everyone has learned a lot, and I'm sure that that all the links to the guidelines and to all the links that we have seen in the chat could bring some more information. So I would like to recommend to those who have not followed the MOOC yet to do so, and you still have at least a month and a half. So don't hesitate to share the link of the MOOC to people who have not shared it yet. So, and I thank you all for your participation and see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice evening or afternoon. Bye-bye.
Yes,
Thank you.
Same
Bye
here.
bye, everyone.